friend and the producer of many documentaries, The Capitalist Conspiracy, and Vitamin B17. You did a documentary on that too, The Cure for Cancer. So I just wanted to kind of ask you a question. You know, a lot of people are, you know, young students on campus who are, you know, kind of influenced by Marxist ideology. They're always talking about how Ron Paul is a capitalist and, you know, free market capitalism never works out. In your documentary, you talked about an international capitalist conspiracy, but is that free market capitalism, or is that corporatism, you know, the welfare state and private business coming together? What's the difference between that capitalist conspiracy and the capitalism that Ron Paul endorses?
Well, yes. The question really takes us to the heart of a very important problem in our society, and that is the fact that we don't have words that are universally understood by everybody as meaning the same thing. When one person uses the word capitalism, that may sound like it's an evil thing. Another person says capitalism is a wonderful thing. And then you have all these other words. Well, what about socialism versus capitalism? And you've got left-wing versus right-wing, and you've got conservatives versus liberal, and all these words. Now we've got neoconservatives, and we've got Maoists, and we've got Marxists, and, you know, all these words. And the funny thing is that when you try and define them, it's very hard to find any two people that will agree to this definition of any of those words. And that's one of the reasons we have kind of a Tower of Babel. Everybody's disagreeing, and they don't really know what they're talking about, at least in terms of outside their own consciousness. So what I have found is that when you strip away all those words and drill down to the basic underlying concepts that are underneath them, you find that in the Western world, there are only two words or two concepts that mean anything. And all the rest are merely variants of one of those two basic concepts. Well, what are they? The one concept is individualism, and the other one is collectivism. Now, those words aren't, you know, in the common dictionary or the vernacular of the average person. But if you go back in history and you look at the political writings of even a few decades ago, you find that these words were used a lot, and people did know what they meant. So basically, collectivism is the concept of big government, that government is the solution to all problems. There are certain elements within collectivism that are common to all of these things. Nazism, fascism, socialism, communism, they all are variants of this thing called collectivism. And there are certain concepts that are common to them all. I just mentioned one because you probably don't have enough videotape.
Oh, I have some videotape, so, yeah. But I think it's an important question because, you know, a lot of students are always agitating for the communist revolution. They want to go back to the good old days of Stalin and Mao and, you know, all that stuff.
A little aside on that, I can sympathize with that because the Marxist slogans are very appealing, you know, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, and so forth. You know, rise up against capitalist exploitation and be for peace and be against war, and all these slogans are very appealing. But when you get rid of the slogans and start drilling down to the concepts, you find certain hardcore themes that surprisingly are found also in fascism and Nazism. What are they? I'll just give you one, and maybe that's a teaser to get some people to come to our website and read about some of the others. But they all have the concept that the group is more important than the individual. That the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. Okay? I was taught that in school, and it sounded reasonable at the time. But that is the ideological handle that all of the totalitarian systems use to violate all the rules that you could possibly think of and commit horrendous crimes against society and against humanity. Well, it's for the greater good of the greater number. We have to sacrifice a few people, or a few million people, even if necessary, to preserve society or to preserve the nation, that sort of thing. Well, when you really delve into that, you find that that argument falls apart because, first of all, there is no such thing as a group. It's the word group is a concept. It's an abstraction for the concept of many people. They're only people. Groups don't exist except in the mind of the person using the word. It's like the word forest. There's no such thing as a forest. You can't touch a forest. You can't burn down a forest. But you can touch trees and you can burn down trees. So it's just a word concept for many trees. And the same thing with group. There's no such thing as group. There are only individuals. And so if you sacrifice the individuals for the assumed right of the group, which doesn't even exist, you've made a terrible intellectual mistake and a political mistake as well, because what you've done is set in motion a process which will destroy all of the individuals and then destroy the group as well. In other words, the best way to work against the best interest of the group is to work against the best interest of the individual. Individuals all are. Anyway, we go into more of that, but that's the kind of thing that people need to think about. The next thing is if the group is more important, let's have a majority vote. If everybody votes for something, we should do it, right? Because the group is more important, and it's the greater good for the greater number. The majority should rule, and all that sort of thing. It doesn't hold up either under all conditions. Take, for example, a lynch mob. Well, there's a perfect example of democracy, pure democracy in action. If there's only one dissenting vote, then he's at the end of the rope. So you got to say, well, wait a minute. Yeah, the majority should rule, but there have to be limits. What are those limits? Well, the limits have to be the majority should rule so long as they don't violate the rights of the individual.
The difference between a republic and a democracy.
No, it's not a democracy anymore in the pure sense of the word. It's a republic, a classic constitutional republic. So these are the things that I think we need to think more about before we run off in all directions and embrace ideologies which sound good to the ear, but when you examine them intellectually, or even more importantly, if you examine them historically and see what they actually evolve into in the countries which have adopted them, you find that they completely fall apart. They're not something we want to endorse. So we come back to your question about capitalism. What is capitalism? It doesn't mean anything. Except if you might say there are two kinds of capitalism. Mainly means the accumulation of material goods or tools, that sort of thing, the capital of a productive society. Well, everybody is a capitalist. Even the socialist countries have productive tools. It's a question of who's going to own them or who's going to control them. Not even ownership, it's control. And it always, in all systems, the capital winds up in the control of a few people. It always does. Now, whether they're the commissars of the Soviet Union or the guys with the silk hats in old-style capitalism in New York, it's always a few people running the system, you see, and controlling most of the money and the productive tools and so forth. But now we get down to the question of what kind of capitalism. Are we going to have free enterprise capitalism with competition between the capitalists, which is good for society because it brings down the price of goods and services through competitive process? Or are we going to have monopoly capitalism? They're totally different concepts. And people get them confused because they look at monopoly capitalism, which would be like the system advanced by the Rockefellers, for example. They're not free enterprise competitive capitalists at all. They're monopoly capitalists.
Distinction, yeah.
They're monopoly capitalists. And so they are the ones that go into partnership with the government so they can pass laws to ensure and protect the monopoly over the marketplace. Whereas a competitive or free enterprise capitalist wouldn't want the government in it at all, except to make sure that the contracts are honored, that nobody is stealing or lying or cheating. Other than that, hands off. Now, those would be the competitive capitalists, and those are the ones that built this country. Those are the ones that made it a great industrial country. And then at the turn of the century, the monopoly capitalists came to political power, like J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers and so forth. And the system changed. The words didn't change. We're still capitalists, but now the system changed and they became monopoly capitalists. So we need to understand these words, and every time you get into that analysis, you wind up with a necessity to understand the difference between individualism and collectivism. Once you get that straight, then all the rest of these words just fall away. They don't mean anything.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for that explanation or clarification.
Hope it was helpful.
Yeah. Thank you very much.